What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, July 19th, 2016 here. And, of course, tomorrow's the anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing and the landing of Viking 1 on Mars. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. A little walk down memory lane, as it were. Now, obviously, top news, the Republican convention is still going on. A lot of turmoil and chaos, but in the middle of all of that, they're still managing to actually get some work done. And Donald Trump has blocked the GOP platform, plank, which would have sent lethal weapons to Ukraine to use on the eastern Ukrainian republics. And, of course, all those Republican war hawks are out there. How can you do this? How can you do Where are our entire powers? We have to send weapons and kill people. You know what I think? I think we ought to take all these war hawks who think war with Russia is a good idea, in both parties. All the parties. Okay, give them parachutes, give them rifles, parachute them right into Red Square. Your problem now, Putin. We don't want to deal with these people anymore. But it's proof. Donald Trump wants to go back to being friends with Russia and China, wants to engage in trade. So, there you are. Already we're into the convention, and he's already acting on one of his promises. Now, Melania got her chance at the microphone last night, came on up with a barb against Hillary, saying that Donald will never be bought, which is, of course, something we all know about. He's got his own money. He doesn't need money coming in from anybody. Whereas Hillary is a classic money junkie. Doesn't matter how much she's got, she's going to have more, and she'll sell out anything at all to get that. Now, there was a bit of a goof where Melania's speech apparently seemed to paraphrase closely, if not plagiarize, something from Michelle Obama in 2008. And a lot of people are wondering if somebody pulled another dirty trick, because as you're probably already aware, these speeches are prepared by professional speechwriters. They don't write their own speeches, and they get on up there. And given this open door to an accusation of plagiarism, which, by the way, politicians do all the time, it's not a huge scandal about that. Plus the lack of personal anecdotes, which is usually the hallmark of a family member's speech at these conventions. A lot of people are thinking that somebody swapped that speech at the last second, an infiltrator inside Donald Trump's camp. And again, dirty tricks, just like Richard Nixon pulled. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, you need to go back and actually read the book, All the President's Men. Because in the movie, as good as the movie is, it doesn't go into details about some of the stuff they would do in terms of these dirty tricks. And it was stuff like this. Swap a speech, call up and cancel a venue for an event. You know, say, I'm calling from somebody's campaign here, we've changed our mind, we're going to a different venue, and then the rally would show up and the doors would be locked. I mean, that kind of stuff goes on all the time. That stuff goes on all the time. All righty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yeah. Yeah, Mike, I didn't have a problem with her speech. I kind of disagreed with that Navy SEAL guy, though, because he goes, the world's a dark place and we're the only light. Well, the world's a dark place because we created it.
You're absolutely right. But again, when you're talking about a political convention and a political speech, you have to walk that fine line between what you really think the people need to know and what they're ready to listen to. And I've often said the art of being a rabble-rouser is knowing what the rabble is ready to hear. Otherwise, you trigger a defensive mechanism and they just tune right on out. And Americans still want to believe we're the greatest nation on earth. In fact, that ties in very, very closely with Donald's campaign message of Make America Great Again. And so I don't think you're going to have anybody getting up on that podium and saying, you know, the world is a terrible place and it's all the fault of the United States. That's just not practical politics.
Hey, did you hear anything about, like Wayne Madsen says there's going to be, after Ted Cruz speaks tonight, there's going to be like walkouts. Did you hear anything?
I haven't heard anything about that. We've already had walkouts. I think Ohio walked out, Colorado walked out. Everybody is grandstanding, trying to force an issue. But unless a huge number of delegates are about to go rogue, which would probably trigger lawsuits at the state level, that first ballot should hand Donald Trump the nomination. And I don't know if all of these dump Trump people, the 12%, who want him out and don't care if Hillary gets the White House, I don't know if they really still think they have a chance of getting him out, or if they're going through the motions to prove to their sponsors that they really did try as hard as they could.
And Mike, on that, I want to switch gears real quick. On that Baton Rouge shooting, with the, did you see any of the close-up pictures of the shooter with the ski mask on? He had there's a company over here that that was no AR-15, that was a ISI Tavor, or it's actually over here, the IWI Tavor. It's made in Israel, that's a bullpup close combat rifle. That's not a sniper rifle, that's not an AR-15, that is a Tavor, if you see the close-ups of that rifle.
Well, you know, there have been so many of these shootings, and they just had another one in Kansas City just a few minutes ago. They're starting to blur together, and I find myself tuning out on them. They've gone back to this well too many times. You know, right now I'd kind of like to stay focused on the convention and the politics, and mostly, you know, Hillary's numbers are taking a nosedive over the trust issues. And I think we need to put our effort on that, on getting on out and talking to people and saying, it doesn't matter what Hillary tells you from that podium, that if you vote for her, she will make sure you have free ice cream for life. She'll never keep that promise. You cannot take anything Hillary says at face value. And in contrast, of course, Donald Trump comes out of the world of business. He's not a career politician. And in the world of business, your word is your bond. If you get a reputation for not keeping your promises, you're out of business. And that's the way Donald Trump has been raised. Whereas Hillary, being a professional politician, they lie about everything from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. Because that's what they do. That's what gets them what they want.
Exactly. Yeah, Hillary just wants to be president for Hillary, not for everybody, like they said last night.
Oh, yeah, she's just caught up in the glory about, you know, she's going to be the first female president of the United States of America, and, you know, and of course it's going to open up the doors for more of this corruption that we saw during her husband's term in office and since. Her attitude is, you know, once she's president, she owns the country and she's going to do whatever she wants with it for her own profitability. She is a money junkie. Look how much money she's got, and she still cannot control her appetite for more.
Well, if she loses, I think the Democrats will roll out as a transgender midget to run for office.
Well, Hillary's got the nomination. There's absolutely no question. I'm going to suspect that all of these lawsuits that have been filed over all the Democratic primary fraud are somehow going to get postponed and delayed until after the election, or at least until after the elections are certified, at which point all of the physical ballots get destroyed. In fact, they're already destroying them down in San Diego, and that's illegal. They're shredding those provisional ballots because a lawsuit's been filed down there to force the counting of those provisional ballots, because there were more provisional ballots than Hillary got votes, and it could reverse the outcome. And, I mean, the whole thing stinks from top to bottom.
Well, it's only illegal for people who are allowed to follow, or have to follow the law. It's not illegal for those who are above the law. That's the difference.
Well, you know, I'm one of those old-fashioned paleoconservatives that the laws are supposed to be for everybody, and including Ms. Hillary. Okay?
Yeah, unfortunately. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, while Donald Trump is over at the convention, and Hillary is out there, she's gone back to campaigning in the swing states because she's sinking in the polls in those critical swing states. And so she's out there campaigning, and you can almost see the desperation in the campaign. She's out there trying to fight her image as being part of this establishment, and she's gone back to the vagina vote issue. You know, of course I'm not part of the establishment. I'm a woman. And apparently having female genitalia is revolutionary, according to Clinton. So we posted a list of other famous vaginas throughout history, including Lizzie Borden, Ursula Bathory, and the Manson girls, as a reminder that being a woman does not necessarily make you a better human being. Doesn't make you more moral. In fact, the only reason Lizzie Borden got off was the then prevalent social belief that women just couldn't do these kinds of things. So, moving on here. Now then, interestingly enough, Congress, or at least some members of Congress, are going to bypass the Department of Justice and the FBI. They've gone directly to U.S. Attorney Channing Phillips to open an investigation to determine whether Hillary Clinton committed perjury when she testified under oath before Congress. Now, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who I thought was supposed to be stepping down as chair of the Democratic National Committee, but she still lingers on, kind of like the heartburn after a really cheap bowl of chili. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz is saying Hillary Clinton didn't lie to Congress about her emails. She's saying it's a difference of opinion, really. And they understand they're stuck here because there's no difference of opinion. Hillary said there was nothing marked classified on her server. The FBI found lots of classified information. Hillary testified under oath. She turned over all her work-related emails. The FBI found work emails on her server that had not been turned over. Hillary stated that the reason for the private email server, she wanted to use one device for convenience, and the FBI reported she was using multiple devices, which we knew. We had pictures of her with the BlackBerry and the iPhone and the tablet and all of that stuff. There's no gray area there. Hillary's statements before Congress were simply not true. And now you have Loretta Lynch out there saying, well, lying under oath may not really be a crime. Of course it is. Lying under oath, perjury, which also does apply to testimony before Congress, carries with it an up to 5-year prison sentence in order that people will be very, very cautious about lying to the court, to the Congress. If lying under oath isn't a crime, then why do we even bother with the oath? That's what that whole ritual is all about. When you take that oath to tell the truth, you are acknowledging if you are caught in a lie, you understand you will go to jail for a very long time and pay a huge fine. And Hillary understands she's vulnerable on this. More and more people are saying if she lied to the Congress, of course she's going to lie to the people. Lying to the people doesn't have any penalties. If she lies to the people, she doesn't go to jail. She doesn't pay a fine. There have been politicians who've gone on out and defended lying to the voters as protected speech under the First Amendment, which is absurd. The First Amendment is there to protect the truth, not to protect lies. But that's how absurd this whole situation is. And there's another scandal out there people are forgetting right now. Everyone's focused on the emails and the server and the possible espionage that was going on. But while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, $6 billion, with a B, vanished without a trace from the State Department. And that needs to be looked into. Where did that money go? Into the Clinton Foundation? Let's take a phone call. Steve in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, that's a redefining of the language, redefining of the terms of perjury by Loretta Lynch. That's amazing. But, they've been doing it all along, redefining what the definition of is. But that's not what I called about. I called about the stump speech that Hillary did the other day, talking about, she was pandering to the black vote, of course. She panders to anybody who's in a crowded race, no doubt about it. But she was talking about the statistics of black children dying before a certain age versus a white child. And you just have to go back to the statistics in, the last 6 months in Chicago, over 2,000 murders of black people at the hands of other black people. But she fails to recognize or even mention that the black-on-black death
No,
high,
because she's pushing that race issue. And we know that she's trying to fan that up because she thinks if she can get the black people angry enough with the white people, they will vote her into the White House, and then she'll paint it black. Who knows what the heck is going to go on with all the pandering. But that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to create division in order to capitalize on that division so that people aren't really thinking about her qualifications or lack thereof to be president. I mean, even if we take FBI Director Comey's testimony at face value, he basically painted Hillary Clinton as a very reckless, sloppy, negligent person. And we can't have somebody like that holding those keys to the nuclear warheads.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks a lot for the phone call. MSNBC's Matthews are out there saying people aren't going to vote for Clinton. They don't like the way things are going, and they see Hillary Clinton as a continuation of the status quo. Susan Sarandon said exactly the same thing. She was being interviewed, and the interviewer said, well, I assume you're going to vote for Hillary Clinton, and Susan Sarandon said no. And the interviewer was surprised. Well, I mean, she's a woman candidate, and you're a woman. Why wouldn't you vote for her? And Susan Sarandon said, a vote for Hillary Clinton is a vote for the status quo, and the status quo is not working. And that's exactly what's going on. And Hillary's trying to get away from this image of being part of the establishment by saying, I'm a woman. Of course I'm not part of the establishment. She's been at the heart of the darkest heart of our establishment, going all the way back to Iran-Contra. So Hillary's doing that speech at the NAACP, and she's talking about the killing of black people, and as our caller pointed out, most black people are killed by other black people. And the statistics show that when the police murder an innocent American, they're murdering twice as many whites, almost twice as many whites as blacks, because they're so afraid of the negative publicity of killing a black person. But if they kill a white person, it gets nothing in the corporate media, and that's why more white people are being killed by the police. Hillary's also out there saying white Americans need to do a better job recognizing their privilege. She's hopping on that bandwagon of white privilege, and it must go away. And it's reverse racism is what it is. And you know something? It's not really working. Because rather amazing development reported over at Government Slaves. Apparently 14 conservative Hispanic leaders signed a letter saying they will back Donald Trump. Mostly because they don't believe Hillary Clinton can be trusted with any of her promises regarding immigration. With Donald Trump, they know what they're going to get. With Hillary, you can't. She changes what she says at every new speech venue. And she's a proven liar, even under oath. Hillary's out there doing the classic pot calling the kettle black, saying Donald Trump is the most dangerous presidential candidate ever. But she is. If she gets the White House, it's going to be more war, more economic predation on the people, more corruption, more Wall Street favoritism. Now, Guccifertu has come out with another email dump from the Democratic National Committee servers that he hacked into and found confirmation. Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic National Committee have been rigging the state Democratic primaries for Hillary Clinton all along. Now, it's not being reported in the corporate media because they are part and parcel to this campaign to convince us that Hillary Clinton needs to be the president of the United States of America. And she's absolutely the last person that should be president of the United States of America. If we get to November and that presidential ballot has Hillary Clinton and Godzilla, that lizard gets my vote. That's where we are on this. Yet another lawsuit has been filed to force a count of all the ballots in all these states where there was all this skullduggery going on. States where Bernie Sanders actually won the popular vote and somehow Hillary Clinton came out with more delegates. They weren't even trying to hide what was going on. It was like Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Hillary came on out and said, yeah, we're going to steal the election, but if you're loyal Americans and loyal Democrats, you'll just sit down and shut up and not pay any attention. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, as you know, all last week, we were hearing these dire warnings that Black Lives Matter was going to disrupt the Republican National Convention. There was going to be panic in the streets, and the city of Cleveland was buying all this new stuff, and there were court fights about what they could do. And according to Fox 8, there are some protesters around the Republican National Convention, but nowhere near as many as were being forecast, and it's not as violent as anybody was concerned it was going to be. Like I said, when those bikers for Trump showed up, the Black Lives Matter and the new Black Panthers, they just toned right down, got nice and polite and quiet and respectable. So let's talk about Turkey. Things are kind of spiraling out of control over there. There's even talk that Turkey may be kicked out of NATO, which I think would be a good thing because NATO needs to start getting whittled down to manageable size. We're now finding out that apparently Turkish intelligence caught wind that a coup was coming. And because that got out, the timeline for the coup was pushed up. It wasn't supposed to happen until the early hours of July 16th. And then somebody said, Turkey's government knows it's about to happen, and they said, let's just go for it now. And that was one of the reasons it was so uncoordinated and the reason that it failed. Now, there was that story a while ago about all these helicopters that are missing from the military inventory. And now there's an article coming out from the Express in Great Britain. Turkey in hunt for Red October-style race to find rebel Navy commanders still at sea. And they're talking about how there are 14 missing Turkish naval ships along with those helicopters, and where are they? We've got to find them. I know where they are. They're up in the Baltic. They're all taking part in Operation Sea Breeze. It was announced in the media that Turkey was sending forces to take part in those games. That's where they are. Big deal over there. Now, needless to say, Erdogan has taken advantage of this situation. It's an unprecedented anti-democratic crackdown in Turkey. He's fired all the university deans and suspended 21,000 private school teachers. He's acting like a tyrant. He's acting like a dictator. And whoever was behind this coup, and I still think it was the CIA, they have succeeded in transforming a borderline democratic nation into another Islamic dictatorship, which is supposed to be the bad guys. Now, Turkish officials are still blocking all access to that air base where all the nuclear weapons are. The city power is still cut off. They're still running on backup generators, and because of the no-fly zone, they can't fly any missions out of that base to either Syria or Iraq. So the campaign against ISIS is now shut down, which for those who are the secret backers of ISIS is actually a good thing. And Turkey still hasn't quite settled down. Apparently there are anti-government protesters, and it's resulted in clashes between police. This taking place in Istanbul. They're having to use tear gas. So this idea that the Turkish people as a whole were supporting Erdogan doesn't appear to be accurate. I would say probably the Muslims are in favor of him, and the ones who don't want to be Muslim are not. It's a broad brush, but I think that's the way it's going to be breaking down. Meanwhile, the top Turkish official in charge of the campaign against ISIS has been found dead. Details are still coming in on that, but the purge seems to be happening. The analysis of what's been going on is moving forward over at Global Research in Canada. They're saying post-coup Turkey will be distinctly Eurasian. It was already starting to cozy up to Russia and China, even started to be friends with Israel and pull away from Western influence. That may have been the motive for this very hasty attempt at a coup d'etat. Because if Turkey goes over to the other side, that's the centerpiece of power projection in that part of the world for the United States. And this botched coup has only accelerated that departure of Turkey. Now, over at Xinhao.net, they're talking about this tightrope that the United States... Oh, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this growing fight between Turkey and the United States over Fethullah Gulen, who is this cleric, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, currently living in Pennsylvania. And he has been linked to CIA, and Turkey is convinced that this Gulen was the mastermind of this coup attempt, and they're demanding his extradition. And this has put the United States in a very awkward position because Turkey is basically saying, without the extradition of Gulen, there is no more alliance between Turkey and the United States. Now, the United States does not want to extradite Gulen for two reasons. First and foremost, because he is linked with the CIA. Turkey will wring all the secrets out of him and then put him on public display as proof of Washington, D.C.'s treachery. And, of course, the United States government doesn't want to be seen as caving in to such a demand from a foreign government. So the only way out for the United States, and I'm sorry, Mr. Gulen, but he's going to get really, really depressed and go for a walk in Fort Marcy Park and decide to kill himself, or he's going to have a sudden case of small plane-itis or something else, where the U.S. can send the dead body over to Turkey for proper, merciful funeral services and the rest of it. That's the only way out of this political trap. They're really stuck. And in any event, it may be too little, too late. TASS is reporting that Erdogan has made phone calls both to Putin and to Hassan Rouhani, saying Turkey is now ready to restore regional peace together with Iran and Russia. This is a major body check to U.S. foreign policy in the region. The U.S. has botched this coup d'etat, and as a result, they just lost the keystone to their entire Middle Eastern domination policy. This is a major, major setback. It may be the death blow to this agenda to dollarifize all of the Middle East. And this gets us to an article over at the Cato Institute that really says it all. The mess in Turkey only underscores why the United States should avoid foreign meddling, especially in cases where it doesn't really serve a critical need. There may be times where you need to meddle to head off a war, but to go in and meddle, to tinker with the economies, to make a fast buck, you're courting disaster. And it looks like they've got one on their hands right now. And the fallout from all of this is starting to cascade all around the world. Over in Russian Georgia, as opposed to American South Georgia, the Georgians are looking at all that's been going on, and all of a sudden they're getting cold feet about potentially merging with NATO or the European Union or any of these other Atlanticist institutions. And they're starting to say, you know, we might be better off pivoting back to Russia, because Russia's making deals, and the U.S. and Europe are making wars. And even Europe is getting cool on that idea. Now, down in Syria, another article coming out of Global Research in Canada. Syria's moderate rebels are not moderate, and they're not rebels. And it's basically pointing out that the so-called moderate rebels that our government continues to openly support are committing horrific war crimes. And they are not genuinely Syrian rebels. Most of them are foreign mercenaries. 95% of the so-called Syrian Free Army are not Syria. It's a mercenary hired army attempting to overthrow a government under the guise of a popular uprising. And they've been trying to play this scam for 5 years now. Now, while the U.S. forces, NATO forces, are trapped on that base in Turkey and cannot launch, Russian bombers have dealt a devastating blow to the terrorists, allowing the Syrian army to complete the encirclement of Aleppo. Their supply lines are cut off. Their lines of retreat are cut off. This could be pretty much the beginning of the end of the war in Syria. Meanwhile, down in Iraq, people are starting to look at what's going on down there, starting to tally up the bodies. How many bodies? How many people? How many civilians have been killed by these U.S. wars in Iraq? And they're saying it's easily over 1 million. It's easily over 1 million. Now, as you know, when the Chilcot report came on out, the International Criminal Court came on out and said, well, we're going to prosecute some of the lower-level soldiers for war crimes, but we can't touch Tony Blair. We absolutely cannot. Well, that's not the end of it. Apparently, the families of all those British soldiers who were killed in Iraq are crowdfunding to be able to launch a massive civil litigation against Tony Blair and sue him for the wrongful death of their family members. And they have grounds. Because Tony Blair lied the nation into war, the war is illegal. Fraud negates consent. Same thing that George Bush did with his claims about yellow cake uranium and how Iraq was tied in with 9/11 and Iraq had nuclear weapons. They're open to civil litigation. And I hope these people over in Great Britain get their crowdfunding together, hire the very best lawyers they can, and sue Tony Blair for every single illegal cent that he has got. I might even chip in a few bucks myself. Story coming out of Global Research again. The United States is getting ready to set up 5 military bases in the Kurdistan region. And these bases are being set up in places that would guard the soon-to-be-created borders of the new Kurdistan, which is going to be carved out of Iraq and Syria. And obviously, the United States has not bothered asking whether Syria and Iraq or even Turkey are okay with this idea of having large chunks of their nations whacked off and made into a new nation by the United States. We're back into that whole foreign meddling thing. Meanwhile, up in Ukraine, the Russian FSB arrested a spy who was using the OSCE as a cover, working there as a translator. And based on his testimony, they're basically saying OSCE is riddled with Western spies that are working against the Eastern Ukrainian republics. They're not an objective third-party examination analysis group. They're part of the problem. And the whole world is on the verge of this global revolt against the oligarchs. Over in Slovakia, there are massive protests now demanding the Slovakian Prime Minister and Interior Minister resign over the corruption in their country. The whole world is waking up. It's going to be a global revolt against the oligarchs. Wouldn't that be something for the history books? The war to end the money junkies. That would be a good thing. Now, the new British Prime Minister, Theresa May, has rattled a lot of people by announcing she would have no hesitation to order nuclear strikes on other countries as a first strike. And apparently Parliament is already prepared to vote through new funding for increased nuclear weapons. Now, whether Theresa May is saying that just to prove how butch she is, or if she's sending a not very subtle warning to the European Union not to think about possibly reinvading Britain after the Brexit. But she's out there talking very, very tough. And I'm a little alarmed at how many people are starting to talk about nuclear weapons in a very casual, conversational, everyday kind of an attitude. Netanyahu is taking time away from his being investigated for money laundering to come on out and declare that the U.S. and Israel will conclude this military aid deal that they've been talking about, which is Israel demanding and the U.S. saying, okay, we'll give you more. Yeah, we'll give you more. Just don't shout that H word at us anymore. And Israel is whining and crying because apparently up in Germany, there's a university that has decided not to renew the employment contract of Dr. Samuel Salzborn, who has been held aloft in the media as a prominent academic expert in German anti-Semitism. Anytime Israel wants to claim that the German people have returned to anti-Semitism, this is the guy they go to. And the university has said, we're not going to renew his contract. We don't have any reason to renew the contract. And Israel's screaming, this is an insult. It's a crime. We've got... Well, maybe, did you ever stop to think? We're all just sick and tired of hearing about something that supposedly happened before we were all born, which is inevitably followed by a demand for more free stuff for Israel. And it's worn out. We're kind of sick and tired of it. And apparently this expert has made some very bizarre comments over the years. This Dr. Samuel Salzborn came on out and said those Israeli athletes who were murdered at the Munich Olympics deliberately sacrificed their lives. They put themselves in a position to be killed to draw the world's attention to the horror of terrorism and all the suffering of the Israelis. I really don't think those athletes were thinking along those lines. They were there to win the medals. So, let's see. Over in Bahrain, they're starting to strain at their leash as well. Bahrain is saying that the U.S. and U.K. criticism of their domestic policies, which are brutal, it's unacceptable interference. So the America's imperial empire appears to be fracturing, much as the way the Roman Empire did, as the provinces get restive and discover that Rome lost so many legions, they couldn't hold the empire together, and they started breaking off until eventually the Roman Empire split in two. And the Western Empire collapsed shortly thereafter, and the Eastern Empire lasted up until the Ottoman Empire. Now, as you know, on the same day as the Turkish failed coup d'etat, they finally released what we're being told are 28 classified pages from the original 9/11 report. They were heavily redacted, and they were put on out there, and they came and went. And now we're seeing the corporate media flooded by all these analysts who are apparently hoping you haven't read the actual 28 pages. Because they're out there saying, this proves Saudi Arabia did 9/11. We've got to deal with Saudi Arabia. They did 9/11. Those evil people over at Saudi Arabia, they did it. And, of course, if you read the actual 28 pages, there's nothing substantive in it. It's all rumor and innuendo. You know, the 9/11 pilots were in contact with somebody who may have been in contact with the Saudi princes, hairstylists, gardeners, lawyers, groundskeepers, chiropodists. I mean, they're going through 7 degrees of separation to try and make a link here. There's nothing substantive in it. And so I reposted my article debunking the Saudis did 9/11. I'm going to ask you all to copy it off and flood it into your social media contacts. Because, again, if you want to know if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a motive for Saudi Arabia to do 9/11. Saudi Arabia has grown rich beyond dreams of Midas on that petrodollar deal. And as part of the petrodollar deal, they have reinvested much of that money back in the United States in direct investment in companies, loans, purchase of treasury bonds. The Saudis know if they did something like 9/11, the first thing the U.S. government's going to do is freeze all that money. The way the courts are already saying it's okay to take Iran's money for terror attacks, even though we can't prove Iran had anything to do with it. So the Saudis don't really have a motive. They're not going to kill the golden goose that has made them so rich, especially now when their economy is stressed by that poorly considered oil price war. They don't have a motive. And if Saudi Arabia got it into their heads that they wanted to hurt the United States of America, they don't need to crash planes into buildings to do it. All they have to do is ask for their money back. Refuse to roll it over. Say, well, we're going to dump our treasury bonds. We want our money back. And that could be the trigger that brings the entire U.S. economy down, because we're talking a significant amount of money. And it would be perfectly legal for Saudi Arabia to do that. And that's why this attempt to blame Saudi Arabia for 9/11 is absolute USDA choice bovine excrement. It's another attempt to protect Israel and the U.S., and it's another setting the stage for another intervention. Because by now the pattern should be obvious. Whoever the U.S. wants to invade and make war on, they were part of 9/11. First it was Afghanistan. And we went in and we wrecked Afghanistan, except for those opium poppy fields. They're doing great. And then they said, oops, we were wrong. It wasn't Afghanistan, it was Iraq. And we went into Iraq and we wrecked that place, except for the oil fields. And now they're saying, we were wrong. It wasn't Iraq after all. It was Saudi Arabia. It's a repeating pattern. We've seen it so many times before. So let's get into the economic news now. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. This is the end of the game. Corporate defaults are surging across the globe. Companies are going out of business. In large part, that's because of the collapse of the consumer economy. And the consumer economy has collapsed because as part of the New World Order agenda, all of our lifestyles around the world have to be crushed down to the lowest common denominator so they can drop the borders. And that means we don't have any money to spend. And if we don't have money to go down to the shopping malls and buy what they're selling, the malls are going to close. And the manufacturers that make those products are going to go out of business. And that's exactly what's happening. It was an ill-considered policy. Confidence in the U.S. economy has slumped to a multi-year low, according to Gallup. Over in Europe, their economic confidence is at the lowest point in the last 4 years. We all know what's going on here, and all the happy talk and soaring, manipulated stock markets aren't going to change that. We have to take a break for commercials. We've got a caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Let's go ahead and take a phone call. Robert in North Carolina. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Michael. I'm talking on my headphones. Can you hear me well?
Oh, you sound great.
Okay. I like Apple products. Here's the thing. I have to disagree with you on the collapse of the dollar and what Saudi Arabia could do to us. We hold the trump card, and that is the petrodollar, and the SWIFT system could stop them. There's really nothing anyone can do. What will happen in the future is if maybe we go to a gold standard and SDRs, perhaps there's something they could do there. But our Federal Reserve could stop almost any transaction that they wanted to. So really nobody.
Well, let me disagree with that, because without a justification for doing it, if Saudi Arabia says we want our money back and the government and the Federal Reserve block it, then everybody who's got money in the United States is going to start demanding it right then and there. The political costs exceed the financial gain.
Well, again, we've got these aircraft carriers and the God Rod, and really no one's going to stop them from doing that. And I have to disagree with you about a couple other things. I generally like your show. Usually you'll hang up on me and say, I'll let you go here, so don't do that.
It's my show.
For instance, yeah, I know it's your show, but it's my call. So here's the deal. We've got a system set in place that everybody is trapped in. For instance, there's another show that I found out on your Republic Broadcasting, which when you log on to it, it doesn't come up. I have to listen to you through the video because the call-in number is so staticky. But she talks about, and this is something I talked to you about before, is that for all intent and purposes, we are under national emergency. And you made the statement last week that, watch out, we could have trouble out there. It could be the day of rage or whatever, and this is all Obama needs to put in martial law. Well, we already have a functional martial law, and they want to make sure we're functioning like a gulag casino, and we have to take risks to make money, and you're in an open-air prison, and they want you to pay your taxes. But then you go ahead and say things like, oh, yeah, and he'll invoke martial law.
Well, see, the difference is, it's a covert dictatorship. And what they're looking for is a transition to an overt dictatorship where the American people say, okay, this is the new reality and we have to adapt to it. Because while the dictatorship is covert, it's weak and it's in danger from people who are standing up and saying, hey, you're not following the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now,
they don't have to.
They do. From the point of view of the American people, yes, a government that does not comply with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is neither legal nor legitimate. And that's the issue that they're trying to get around, is how they can re-legitimize themselves even though they are not following the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, because their authority rests on that Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And if there is no Constitution and Bill of Rights, there's no legal government in this country. Anyway, Robert, I'm going to cut you off here, but only because we got to do our top-of-the-hour station identification. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And one of the reasons we talk about the possible dark plans of the government is as a deterrent. Because when the government pulls something off like a 9/11, well, let me step back. When they pull off a Pearl Harbor, when Roosevelt spends a year goading the Japanese into the attack and then pretending it was a surprise, they did it and they got away with it because people believe the official story. And so when we look at 9/11 and we look at other potential false flags and we put the warnings out there, it's to undermine that believability in the coming official story. Because one of the most potent weapons we have against these covert operations to control the nation is doubt. If we can make the perpetrators of the false flags doubt that their official story will be believed, then they may decide not to act. Of course, sadly, they're getting more and more desperate, so that might not apply. And that's why we talk about these outcomes. And obviously, at least so far, the dire warnings about the Republican National Convention don't seem to be coming to pass. There aren't huge numbers of protesters. And maybe that's because a lot of people understood that violent protests work in the interest of the government, not the people. Now then, getting on back to the economic news. Deutsche Bank is going through a major restructuring. They're in serious, serious trouble. And they're closing almost 200 branches across the country. Because I guess ordinary consumers' banking business isn't all that profitable as opposed to fraud and money laundering. So why would they bother with ordinary customers anymore? That's just ridiculous. Apparently there's a new stink starting up over Bank of America. This is being reported over at Investment Watch blog. And it's talking about this lady, Christina Anderson, who's gone public over the fact that she went into Bank of America to pull some money out. She had all of her money in there. Poor, innocent, naive child, her. And the teller started asking her all kinds of questions about where did the money come from and what do you want it for. And Christina said, that's really none of your business. And so she went to a different branch to withdraw her money and found Bank of America had locked her account for fraud. They froze her account for fraud. And then when the woman got upset, the Bank of America called the security guards on her. And let's be very, very clear here. That's your money in that bank. And the banks do not have a legal right to refuse your withdrawing that money. I know they're putting a lot of roadblocks in the way. Our local bank down here, if you're going to pull out anything above $5,000 in cash, you have to give them 24 hours notice. But the banks are getting a little too big for their britches, in my opinion here. Now, the largest pension fund in the United States has suffered its worst annual return since the financial crisis due to heavy stock losses. And they're talking about CalPERS. This is a report out of the Wall Street Journal. And that is really the problem with the pensions. A lot of them got defunded during that Wall Street crash of 2008. And what do? They turn around and say, well, it's okay for pension funds to sort of renege and cut back on payments. Because we have a government that holds that banks, which are buildings, are somehow more important than the American people. And that, too, I think, is a very faulty priority. Now, we may be looking at the first salvo of another real estate bubble burst. Apparently over in the Hamptons, which is a very, very wealthy area, their housing market has crashed. Home sales prices have dropped by half so far. Even the money junkies can't afford these homes anymore. And finally, I love this story. Nightmare on Wall Street. Both Republicans and Democrats agree that it is time to reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act. Well, yeah, okay, but the damage has already been done. This is like saying we're going to go ahead and reinstall the fire suppression system, and all that's left of the building is a smoking ruin of ash and debris. It should never have been withdrawn in the first place. So now for the election year, they're trying to look good. They understand the American people are much more sophisticated about the economy and what's going on. They go, yes, we're going to reinstate Glass-Steagall. It's too late. You did the damage when you repealed it the first time. And putting it back in after everything is already destroyed is not going to buy you a lot of forgiveness. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. John in Rancho Cucamonga, California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael. You got a great show as usual.
Thank you.
I like your analogy better than shutting the corral door after the horses have already escaped. But anyway, I was just going to underscore some of your other remarks previous to talking about the banking, about how FDR attempted to goad Germany for a year and a quarter or so before he started working on the Japanese.
Yes.
He's trying to goad him into having the U-boats fire on some of the destroyer escorts that were illegally, in violation of the Neutrality Act, escorting supply ships of munitions and arms to England.
And those were technically illegal as well, although Roosevelt got around it with what he called the Lend-Lease Act. But as soon as Germany and Italy and Japan signed the Axis Agreement, Roosevelt shifted his focus out to the Pacific.
Yeah, well, but I guess in the meantime, though, prior to that, Hitler, not being a sap at all, he instructed his U-boat commanders not to take the bait. And what happened with Japan, the first thing that FDR did was move the long-established location of the Pacific Fleet from San Diego Harbor at the beginning of 1941, moved it to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, to kind of stick his thumb in the eye of the Japanese. And then he also had to fire the... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and even the top Navy commander said this is a mistake. The harbor is not defensible. They'd already been through that airstrike against ships in Taranto, which proved torpedoes in shallow harbors could be made to work, which is exactly what the Japanese did. And they did fire, I forget the name of the admiral, it was Kimmel's predecessor, because he...
Anderson, I think.
Say again?
I think his name was Anderson.
Yes, that's right. Admiral Anderson was fired, and they put Kimmel in the sacrificial spot, and they did. After it was all over, General Short and Admiral Kimmel were held up as the scapegoats for the failure to protect our nation. But Congress restored them to rank posthumously, which was great for the families and obviously not so good for Kimmel and Short themselves. Anyway, we need to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining us. We're talking with John from Rancho Cucamonga, who going down the memory lane of how we got suckered into World War II, which is legitimate discussion while we look at how we're being suckered into World War III. Okay, John has gone, so we're going to go to Phil in Florida. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I don't know if you've already covered this, but, I had the Republican convention on TV last night for a little bit, and seeing all this about Blue Lives Matter and keep our cops, get behind our cops. And the whole thing with the Black Lives Matter, didn't it start because cops were killing 3 Americans on a daily basis?
It really did.
To see it all get, divided like this, it's like, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but to see how this got played out like it is, and now the division, and it's just, you want to scream, but I'll shut up and listen to what you have to say.
Well, what's ridiculous, it's all about divide and conquer. And now I am not in favor of going on out and shooting anybody, police officer or otherwise, but this idea of trying to portray the police as victims is dead on arrival because of all the police brutality, that we have seen, the fact that more white people than black people are being wrongfully killed by the police, the abuses of civil forfeiture, the brutality that we're seeing with pepper spray and tasers and all the rest of it, that's a hard sell to convince us that the police are the victims in this matter, because Black Lives Matter, you are correct, did emerge as a result of the perception that the police were wrongfully killing innocent black people. And so here we have a classic case of the propaganda coming back to bite itself. And what's amazing is anybody who comes on out and says all lives matter gets criticized. Fox News' Shepard Smith came down on Bobby Jindal for saying all lives matter, and yet that should be the prevailing attitude. And I'm still waiting for anybody from Black Lives Matter to come on out and publicly state whose lives don't matter.
I remember you saying that last week, and that's a great way of putting it. But I'll tell you, Mike, I got the feeling last night that they're pulling this off. You know, the whole thing about how murderous our police are, and there's more and more was coming out recently also about how the police departments have been trained by the Israelis. You know, that started to come up, and now watching that convention last night, and then I listened to the Power Hour in the morning, and hearing some of the comments this morning, about they sounded real good last night, the sheriff was good, and I'm going, wait a minute, this everybody's being played like a fiddle here. Don't let yourself be played, I felt like saying, and you can see it just playing out. So I just want to scream, man,
Well, the thing to keep in mind is, yes, the corporate media is going to go on with the charade. That's what they're paid to do. The real question is, are Americans believing what the corporate media is telling them? And the answer is no. Confidence and trust in the corporate media is at an all-time low. Their audiences are in decline. The audiences for the independent media continue to grow. That's why I call them the corporate media, because we're the new mainstream right here, because we've got the lion's share of Americans who are coming to find out the truth for themselves, because they've come to understand if they just sit in their easy chair in the living room looking at that TV, what's being fed to them isn't the truth, but just whatever has been crafted to get them to think what the government wants them to think. And that's all mind control is. There's no weird ray or drugs or anything about that. You control a mind by controlling what it knows. And that's what the job of the corporate media has been all along. And now people are saying, I'm not going to let my mind be controlled. I'm not going to let what I know be controlled. I'm going to go out and start finding out these facts for myself. And that may also be another reason why all of the expected protesters and violence around the Republican National Convention hasn't materialized. They couldn't get people to show up for this thing. Everybody's saying, no, we've seen this before. We saw that at Disneyland back in 1970. We saw that all during the COINTELPRO during 1960s, and we're not going to get fooled again.
Right. Well, one other question, Mike.
Sure.
What's the latest on Dallas as far as picking that apart? I saw a couple videos of showing that the cops were a staged photo of the SWAT team that made it to the Wall Street Journal before it even went to print. I'm not too up on it, but I'm wondering what you know about Dallas being a false flag and or a hoax or whatever. And I'll shut up now and listen off air.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. Dallas does strike me as being another false flag. These days, the safe assumption when anything happens is it's another false flag. Again, this poor officer who got shot in Kansas City may have been another effort to try and say, we have to feel sorry for the police. And again, that's a very, very tough sell. But I tend not to spend too much time digging into the fine details on these issues because, again, that's what the propagandists want. Remember from Shakespeare, Henry IV, Part 2. Make it your business to keep giddy minds busy. In other words, keep everybody confused and looking at minutia so they can't step back and look at the big picture of what's going on. So these things are coming and going, and I look at them and I'll say, this is what I think about it, and then move on and maintain the focus on the real issue, which is, regaining some kind of control of this country by the American people and choosing a different course for the future other than that which has been engineered by Wall Street and the military-industrial complex and the pharmaceutical-industrial complex and all the rest of it, to basically pull back from this path down towards fascist dictatorship. And that's kind of my focus. And we don't really have the time and resources, any of us, to get distracted into little minutiae and argue about that, because that's a classic propaganda technique as well. Keep people arguing over fine details. Rather than, there's one thing we can all agree on. We live under a government that lies to us all the time. We can all agree on that. So let's let the detritus fall away and decide, what are we, the American people, going to do about the fact that we live under a government that lies to us all the time? Is this a nation we wish to bequeath to our children? I don't think so. And so we have to do something about that. Now then, getting on back to the news around the world, a little bit of immigration news. Apparently, Angela Merkel is feeling the political backlash because of this Afghan refugee who went on an axe rampage in this German train. And already the propagandists are out there saying, this is ISIS, this is another ISIS terror attack. Here's the point. This Afghan refugee got shoved halfway across the world, didn't like where he wound up, grabbed an axe and chopped up a bunch of people. And the gun grabbers are already crying, saying, why couldn't he have used an AR-15? What's wrong with this guy? And but Angela Merkel is feeling the political backlash because her open-door immigration policy let this guy in. Whether he acted on his own or he's part of ISIS, it's still a bad thing. And again, even during the heyday of immigration to America and the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island, there was still some due diligence being exercised. When these people wanted to come to the United States, did they have skills that would benefit our economy? Were they carrying contagious diseases? Did they have criminal records in their home country that we should be aware of? We have a right as a nation to control who goes in and out of our nation. It's not racism, it's pragmatism. I have a lock on my front door, not because I hate my neighbors, but because I love my wife. And that's what's going on. Now, there's been another ugly incident down in France. 37-year-old man, who's only being identified as Mohammed B., apparently stabbed a mother and her 3 daughters at a vacation center in southeast France for being dressed too scantily. They were wearing shorts and T-shirts. And basically, the man attacked the woman and her daughters, 8, 12, and 14, at the resort town of Laurent-Montaglin in the Haute-Alps region. And according to the mayor, the motive he gave was they were dressed shamefully. They were not dressed like Muslim women. So how's that cultural integration thing working out for you over there? All right, let's grab ourselves into the phone call. Steve in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, I don't know if I'm sorry to call back, but your last caller brought something to mind. I don't know if you've seen this video on Sandy Hook, but there's the crisis actor David Wheeler and his wife taking the circuits and everything in the past, and he exposed this video. I don't know if you've seen the video. If you haven't, I can send it over your way. But it's quite obvious. The guy was paid. He's an actor. It shows him in an FBI uniform, SWAT team type thing, and he ducks away. He looks away from the camera because he doesn't want to be spotted. But he's playing 2 different roles. I don't know if you've ever seen this video.
Yeah, I think I've seen it a while ago. And, of course, my favorite video was that one that came out of Sandy Hook where somebody leaked the unedited videotape of one of the fathers crying over his dead child. And the guy comes out for the interview, and he's laughing and smiling, and then you see him literally go through an actor's exercise to get himself down into that dark space for the interview. And that was very obviously an actor. I've worked in movies long enough to have seen exactly that process in order to work yourself into that traumatized state. But I need a word of caution here, because a lot of these videos and web articles that claim to have spotted identical people in multiple situations, they don't always turn out to be right. You have to look really, really closely. They look similar, but they're not always the same person, so you have to be very cautious about that. Steve, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We got a caller on the line, Tony in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Aloha, Mike. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good, good. You were talking about Angela Merkel, and I'm not sure if you're aware that she was awarded the Kalergi Prize. Are you familiar with that?
No, I am not.
Kudnihov Kalergi was a guy, he was in charge of the European Union, I think, for 40 years. He was known as the father of the European Union. And he'd written books about the Kalergi Plan, which involved, I'm surprised you haven't heard about this, it involved a unification of Europe, all the races mixing, and everybody under control by Zionist Jews. It's a very interesting thing, and it's very interesting that this guy was financed by the Rothschilds. This prize has been awarded to very notable people, and Merkel being one of them. And that's what his whole objective was to have his ideal race was a lightly tanned populace being controlled by the Jews. And I think he wrote several books about it, but that's what's known as the Kalergi Plan.
Mm-hmm.
You should check it out. And it makes, when you see what's going on, I hate to think, but man, everything seems to be falling into place for this guy. Like I said, this was back in the 30s and 40s.
Well, you know, there are going to be different people who are going to come to the same conclusions here, and I've been saying all along that for the New World Order globalism plan to work, part of the agenda has to be to blend us all together and destroy our sense of our own regional, cultural, or historical identity. Because people with a strong sense of identity, a strong sense of self, they're much harder to boss around. And so part of this reason behind this flood of illegal immigrants into the United States and the flooding of Europe with all these refugees, and there's some big money behind it, like George Soros, the idea was to blur us all together into a single formless mass of humanity with no clear sense of an identity about themselves to make it easier to control them. Unfortunately, the idea that they could do this and get away with it was based on this liberal theory that you can control what is inside the mind of a human being by controlling the environment around them. All this goes back to Margaret Mead's Coming of Age in Samoa, which was published all the way back in 1920. And the book was a fraud. It was an absolute fraud. It's been discredited. And yet this idea that you can control what is in the mind by controlling the environment has been the foundation of the liberal political philosophy ever since. And that's why every time they do one of these things, they fall flat on their face, because they're not willing to go back and question that prime assumption.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been hearing you say that for a long time. I've heard David Duke talk about mixing the races to one race, and I never really gave it much thought. And then when I read this Kalergi Plan, I said, oh, my God, there it is in black and white, and it's been part of the European Union since the beginning. Mm-hmm. And it's just fascinating, fascinating stuff. And I wanted your listeners and you maybe to talk about it a little more, because it's very obscure. I just happened to run across it, and it's mind-blowing. One other thing I wanted to ask you about your teams when it comes to this stuff is aerial surveillance. I was reading a thing from Lockheed Martin where they have a ship that can it's a blimp that can go 60,000 feet, 6 months at a time, and surveil a 600-mile diameter land, and, millions of cubic miles of air. But I was thinking to myself, first of all, they probably already have these in place. But if it were more known, don't you think it would be a deterrent for crime? And if they were using them, wouldn't you think they'd be able to solve more crimes than they do, and needing far fewer law enforcement officers? You're talking saving billions and billions of dollars for communities. But I think it'd be a great crime deterrent. I'll let you do your thing, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on the air on the capability of the surveillance from that altitude, 60,000 feet. And by the way, it costs 3-4 times less than putting a satellite up in the air to use one of these things. And they have a 1-ton payload. So they could be armed, unfortunately.
Well, my first response to that is, has the flood of surveillance cameras all over our society slowed down crime at all?
No, but it's different. It's never where you need it, really. You know, if everybody knew that.
We all know the cameras are out there. We all know the cameras are out there. Anyway, listen, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. I'll respond to your comments when we come back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I want to step back, actually a couple of calls because I have some added comments. With regard to the issue of police brutality, yes, the tendency by government to protect police no matter what they do is a factor. The training by these Israeli security companies and other contractors who have this shoot first, ask questions later attitude that they're spreading among the police, those are factors. But there is another one. And we do need to look at it because I think it affects society as a whole and not just the police force. And that is, again, those prescription antidepressants, which we know that truck driver in Nice was on, and they can trigger unpredictable, violent, suicidal, mass violence behavior. SSRIstories.org, you can go there, read all these case studies of just how these medications can trigger bizarre behavior. Now, right now, roughly 1/4 of all Americans are on some version of a prescription antidepressant. It's a huge, huge money maker. Study done down in Florida showed that police officers actually consume more of these than the average American. So maybe it's 1 out of every 3. But these medications do result in poor impulse control. Now, up until recently, the problem of the effects of antidepressants on the population has always been split into 2 categories. Somebody dies and everybody else. But I think there are other effects because we did our own little analysis. We got the data on the per capita use of antidepressants in the American population, and we paired it up with the data for per capita incidence of domestic violence, and there's a very close correlation. And so it may be that these antidepressants are causing behavior that's not necessarily newsworthy, but is still very damaging to our society as a whole. More bar fights, more road rage, more domestic violence. And I get emails from people all the time saying it just feels like the whole world is going crazy. And maybe it is. Maybe it's being driven crazy by these medications, which are poured into the population because they make money. And nobody cares about the side effects. Nobody cares about the harm. They're protecting those medications. Following Sandy Hook, there was an effort by a citizens group in Connecticut to get the medical records of Adam Lanza. And it was opposed by this attorney from the state medical examiner's office, Patrick Quanachet, who came on out and said, even if in this one case the medications were the cause of this sudden outburst of violence, that's not something the people need to know because then they would stop taking their doctor-recommended medications. And that position makes a lot of sense when you realize how much of Connecticut's economy is based in pharmaceutical companies that are inside that state. And Patrick Quanachet was absolutely wrong when he said even in this one case, because there are thousands and thousands of documented cases and probably tens of thousands of instances of violence where nobody made that connection to the medications the person was on. And somebody needs to take a very good look at this because we may be drugging ourselves into a collective national insanity. And that's not a very good thing at all. Now, getting on to the idea of the surveillance blimp. There are the blimps. There are those solar-powered Gossamer-winged aircraft that can stay aloft for weeks at a time. And I don't see them as a deterrent to crime for the same reason all the surveillance cameras that are all over the place don't seem to have had a limiting effect on crime. The criminals simply know where the cameras are not covering. And if you're talking about a blimp at 60,000 feet, basically any overhanging eave or shelter or anything is going to block you out from it. And the other problem with the surveillance blimp has to do with data management. Like the NSA snarfing up all your emails and text messages and everything, they've got a huge volume of data and no effective way to find what's important. Because maybe you've got a high-resolution image of 600 miles across the United States. But somebody somewhere still has to go through it bit by bit by bit to see what it's actually captured. Now, in terms of surveillance technology, most of it remains optical based. There are thermographs. They're coming down in price. Those are kind of cool. And there are clues that the cutting edge in terms of military surveillance technology lies within the submicron domain, where it's sort of an extension of the technology which eventually wound up in those airport scanners, where they're literally able to see through walls using these microwaves that are high frequency enough to actually form images with. So the technology's out there, but is it usable? And again, you can have a blimp at 60,000 feet taking an image of all of Oahu. How do you find what's important to find inside that image? You have the NSA snarfing up all of our phone calls and our emails and our web browsing history and everything. How do you find what's meaningful in there? Obviously, the NSA hasn't solved that problem yet. I'm sure they're going to ask for a larger budget to work towards a solution here. All right, I want to step back to the political campaign because I just saw this article from PatriotRising.com. Polls show Americans distrust Clinton. Supporters begin to panic. And do you remember a while back where Hillary Clinton said this Benghazi thing is going to blow away? People will forget. And obviously we didn't. And I think Hillary is a victim of her past successes at dodging the consequences for her behavior. Because she's reached a stage of arrogance where she feels it doesn't matter what she does. Nothing will happen. People will still love her. People will still believe in her. You know, she could go on national TV and drop a live kitten into a blender and then say she was showing the dangers of blenders. And she's going to call for new blender safety features, and everybody would still applaud. No, that doesn't really work. And the numbers are turning against Hillary. But remember, we already know there's massive fraud going on in our elections. It is not enough to put Donald Trump in the lead by 5 or 10 points. He has to have a landslide in November or it will be stolen from him. Absolutely. Okay, now then, let's see. Now, I'm not a Hillary defender, obviously, here, but I'm looking at these articles where apparently Hillary's considering Julian Castro as her vice presidential pick, and they're making a big deal over the fact that while he was housing secretary, he expressed his support for Hillary Clinton's candidacy last April. This is technically a violation of the Hatch Act, okay? This law forbids anyone in the executive branch other than the president or vice president from using his or her official position to engage in political activity. But he prefaced the interview saying, taking off my HUD hat for a second. And I think they're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill on this, or this is a trap to get people to pound onto this guy, and they'll say, look, they're grasping at straws to harm Hillary. So I'm going to let that one pass, and I suggest you do the same. It just feels wanky to me. What can I tell you? All righty, let's get on to the science and health news here. Story out of Waking Times. High levels of toxins found in bodies of people living near fracking sites. We know fracking is a major, major environmental disaster. Those pipes are leaking methane. The methane is killing the fish in lakes and ponds and streams. In some cases, people have tap water coming out that you can actually set fire to. That's how dangerous this stuff is. And yet it's being promoted for energy independence. And it's very, very harmful. It really is. And yes, the fracking effluents, the methane, other stuff that's coming out of the ground, plus those fracking fluids themselves are highly toxic, carcinogenic, and radioactive. Remember, I think it was about 2 years ago, we had somebody call into the show who had previously worked for a fracking company, who said the fracking companies made deals with other corporations to take their toxic waste that couldn't be disposed of anywhere else and mix it in with the fracking fluid and pump it deep underground, under the theory that once it was down there, it would never come back up, except that it is. Why? Because they're fracturing the rock. And fractured rock leaks. Little bit of common sense that apparently didn't percolate up to that there executive branch. Now, over in Pennsylvania, there's been a study that is showing a strong correlation between sufferers of asthma and proximity to the fracking sites. This is very, very dangerous stuff. But it makes money, and that's all that matters. That's the morality of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. If it makes money, it's good. If it's not making money, it's bad. And so now we have this article that came out of 12160.info. Apparently last May, there was a gathering of anti-fracking people at the Holiday Inn in Lakewood, Colorado. And they were there because the Bureau of Land Management was there auctioning off oil and gas leases on public lands. And it turned out federal agents infiltrated the group to spy on them. Now, this was the Keep It in the Ground movement, and according to emails that have been leaked to The Intercept, federal agents infiltrated the anti-fracking movement to spy on them. We're all the way back in the 1960s with COINTELPRO. That's why the FBI can't be bothered finding cyber criminals or credit card thieves or even finding those criminal illegal immigrants that have been released out into the public. They're too busy spying on law-abiding American citizens who are, in fact, exercising their constitutional right to express their opinion about things that may be harmful to the public. And again, that was the hallmark of the COINTELPRO program back in the 1960s. The FBI was infiltrating dissident groups. Obviously, the anti-Vietnam movement, the civil rights movement, the early feminists, the Native American movement, to disrupt them, to sabotage legitimate dissent, to sabotage First Amendment protected freedom of speech. Because the government doesn't really want you to have freedom of speech. They're still trying to figure out some way they can get rid of that pesky First Amendment. Remember when they were trying that free speech zone nonsense? You know, there's a little cage over there in the parking lot. You can go say whatever you want to say over there. But nobody's going to hear you, and that's, of course, by design. Finally, a lot of these PC universities have said, yeah, this was really ridiculous, and they've gotten rid of the free speech zones, and they're saying any public space is there for freedom of speech, which is a victory for freedom of speech. But that's the way the government operates, and it's always operated that way. What we're seeing here today is nothing new. It's all a rehash of the same dirty tricks the government has pulled on the American people for decades. And I know you, like I, were raised on all those movies and TV shows about what great guys the FBI were or are. And it's a fiction. They're not. The FBI is not about solving crimes. They're about protecting the rulers and covering things up, whether it's the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vince Foster, the accidental shoot down of TWA 800, staging false flags. That's what these guys do. The FBI is the American version of the Gestapo. They do the dirty work for the U.S. government. They're the sin eaters, as it were. Now, over in Bunkerville, the judge who presided over the Cliven Bundy standoff and argument with the Bureau of Land Management has issued an order basically withholding the bulk of all the government's evidence in the case from the public. Now, this order was written by U.S. Magistrate Judge Peggy Lean, and it prohibits the defense teams for all 19 defendants from publicly disclosing the grand jury transcripts, FBI and police reports, witness statements, and all other documents the government collected during its investigation. Now remember, Cliven Bundy did that standoff on the grounds that the Bureau of Land Management had exceeded its legal authority in trying to drive him off his land. And in point of fact, the BLM had done just that. When the Bureau of Land Management goes on out and grabs other people's lands, they are in violation of the Constitution's Enclave Clause, which specifically says the federal government is only allowed to own land underneath federal buildings and federal infrastructure like military bases, harbors, airports, that sorts of thing. They're not allowed to just go on out and grab millions of acres of other people's lands and treat it like it's their own. And the Founding Fathers put that Enclave Clause in there because they had seen throughout the history of Europe that in point of fact, when rulers get into economic trouble, the first thing they do is they loot the property of the people, treat it like it's their own, and they start to sell it off. And they wanted to prevent the U.S. government from doing that. And that's why that Enclave Clause is in there. You really do need to read that Constitution. You've got to know the rules. Even if the government isn't playing by them, you need to know what those rules are. You need to know what your rights are. That Constitution wasn't written to tell the government what it could do. It was mostly written to tell the government, to remind the government what it may not do when it comes to the management of this country. And I think this is the reason why the judge has issued this order, is because any legal scholars who look at what was going on are going to find some serious problems. The judge clearly has something to hide in this case. The government has something to hide in this case and how it was managed. Now, the reason for the Bureau of Land Management to be going on out and grabbing all this land has nothing to do with the environment and everything to do with corruption. The Bureau of Land Management has a long history of grabbing hold of lands, driving ranchers off and saying, we're preserving it for some environmental reason, and then 2 to 3 years down the road they say, well, we were wrong, it's not critical to the environment, and we're going to sell it off to this particular political crony. See a lot of that going on over in Nevada. The other reason, and we'll talk about it when we come back from this break, has to do with that national debt. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to take a look back in history at the economic reality that led to the abuses of the Bureau of Land Management and the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, as I mentioned many times, and it's in All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, at the end of World War II, the United States secured an agreement among the world's nations called the Bretton Woods Agreement that made the U.S. dollar the global trade and banking currency. And part of that agreement was that the U.S. paper dollars would always be redeemable for $35 per ounce of gold. That was the lock. Now, of course, the Federal Reserve, not actually being part of the government and not under its authority, according to Alan Greenspan himself, overprinted Federal Reserve notes. And the United States started importing manufactured goods and agricultural produce for what was essentially boxes of paper and colored ink. So you get into the Nixon years, and France is looking at this huge pile of currency in their vaults, and they notified the United States government they were going to redeem those paper notes for gold at the Bretton Woods agreed-on price of $35 per ounce of gold. And Nixon looked in Fort Knox and realized they didn't have anywhere near enough gold to redeem those paper notes, in addition of which much of that gold in Fort Knox was already pledged as collateral on government borrowing. And so Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility as a temporary emergency measure, which became, of course, permanent. And that had the effect of undermining world confidence in the dollar. And it also made it more difficult for the U.S. to borrow money because everybody all of a sudden knew they didn't really have the gold to collateralize it with anymore. So Richard Nixon hit on this idea of using the Americans' heritage, their lands, as collateral for more government borrowing. But how to do that without letting the American people know what was going on. And so he created the Environmental Protection Agency. And he was courting the environmental vote. And under the guise of preserving land for future generations of Americans, they started grabbing land like crazy. And they had all these different programs, wilderness zones, wetlands, heritage rivers, roadless areas, all these different programs. And the multiplicity of the programs was to conceal just how big this land grab really was. Because at the moment, it's something like 23% of Americans' lands have been grabbed for various reasons, including the pledging as collateral on government borrowing, all of which is illegal under the Enclave Clause of the Constitution of the United States of America. And subsequent presidents have continued this trend for a variety of reasons. And this gets us back to the presidency of Bill Clinton. And I had forgotten all about this. I need to add it to the epic of Clinton's mess. And it involves the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument in Utah. More when we come back from station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about the real history behind the abuses of the Bureau of Land Management and the Environmental Protection Agency, and how, starting with Richard Nixon's ending of gold convertibility of the Federal Reserve note, they triggered some Band-Aid measures. Now, obviously, in order to keep up foreign demand for U.S. dollars, they got into the petrodollar deal with the OPEC nations, which is still causing problems today. But the other issue had to do with continued U.S. government borrowing, because the ending of gold convertibility convinced the rest of the world the United States didn't really have as much gold as had been thought. And they needed something else as collateral on money lent to the United States government. And so Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency, and they started grabbing land and locking it away under the guise of environmentalism, but in reality to pledge as collateral on government borrowing. And it's something like 22% of the entire country now, of our public lands, which are the property of the American people, and in many cases private lands. And so there's an interesting story, and this goes back to the Bill Clinton presidency, and I'd forgotten about this. I need to add it to the epic of Clinton's mess. President Bill Clinton signed an executive order that designated 1.7 million acres of land in southwest Utah as the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Now, when an area is declared a national monument, it comes under federal control, and it is off limits to mineral extraction and development. Now, that's important because there's a huge amount of low sulfur coal underneath that Grand Staircase Escalante monument. There were companies that were getting ready to do a little bit more coal mining there, and they were immediately driven out of business. And everybody's saying, why did you do this? And then it turns out that American companies who were required by environmental laws to use low sulfur coal only had one other source, and that was the Lipo Group in Indonesia. And that was owned by the Riani family, who it turned out had been very generous donors to Bill Clinton's re-election campaign. And so now they got all this business. They had a new market for their low sulfur coal. And the coal right here in the United States of America was now off limits. And what's really interesting is that by doing this, President Bill Clinton violated Utah's statehood agreement, in which the federal government had pledged that that coal resource was the property of Utah, and Utah in turn was saying this coal will be the funding for our public education system. And so all of a sudden they were cut off from that and now became dependent on federal education funds, which came with federal guidelines on how to teach the children of Utah. You see how all this stuff works out. And it was a big, big stink. And I had almost forgotten about this. It's got to go in the epic of Clinton's mess. So that is why the Bureau of Land Management and the EPA are stealing your public lands, and in some cases your private lands. And don't forget, there's another big scandal regarding one of these other standoffs in an area with a lot of uranium underneath the ground, which has now been licensed to a Canadian company, which is owned by Russia. And apparently a lot of donations went into the Clinton Foundation to secure that deal as well. Remember that old song, This Land is Your Land, This Land is My Land? Woody Guthrie from the Great Depression. And that's true. We, the people, own the United States of America. The government is a caretaker, a temporary one, hired to keep the roads patched, the rails running, the electricity going. That's their job. That's it. And we're in an age where all of our politicians feel that high office gives them ownership of the nation we built to be bartered off and sold. We need a government of statesmen and stateswomen, and instead we have Washington, D.C. filled with all these merchants squabbling over who's going to get the biggest piece of the carcass of what was once the greatest nation on earth. I was making that comment yesterday over this whole illegal immigration problem. The government will try and take credit for it, but we, the American people, we built this country. The bricklayers, the electricians, the architects, the engineers, the carpenters, the road layers, we, the American people, built this nation. And we built it to leave to the next generation of Americans our children. And we see a government that is literally stealing our children's inheritance to give it to a bunch of refugees and illegal immigrants in exchange for votes. That is a true betrayal of the nation and its people by this government. And you should be angry about it. You should be very, very angry about that. Now, once again, underscoring the, let's see, I need to do the shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network. We're talking about the usual stuff, politics and corruption and the Clintons and the economy. By the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Give us a call because the more you call in, the less you have to listen to me. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. This one just tears at your heartstrings. 13-year-old kid saves up $1,200, which is very hard in this day and age, in order to buy a hot dog stand to make money for his disabled parents. The city shuts him down because all of a sudden this 13-year-old with a $1,200 hot dog stand is terrible competition for the 8 restaurants in the town. We've got to protect the established corporate structure, and we can't have anybody just coming on out and starting a business that could compete. What do you think this is, a free country? All right, let's grab some phone calls. Gary in Arkansas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I ran across the tail end of a conversation on another show on RBN. I'm going to butcher this name. La Carova, that's not quite right.
Okay.
Is the host. Anyway, the bottom line is the United States of America is a corporation. That's been well established, and it's also stated in either the USC or one of those type of law books. Anyway, when they incorporated USA Inc., there's obviously, like every corporation, shares issues. And this paper delineates that they issued 100 shares for U.S. Inc., which is the United States of America. You mentioned that the United States is owned by the people. That's not true.
Well, I disagree. I disagree because the corporation that was formed can be a corporation of the government, but that doesn't automatically mean the government, it all of a sudden acquires the property of we the people in the process.
Well,
there are a lot of corporations that don't own much in the way of assets at all.
Let me ask you this question.
What's that?
According to this paper, which I haven't got a copy of or researched myself, but they're pretty good on their research at this program. It's an RBN program. There was 100 shares issued, and 2 shares went to 2 groups or individuals in America and 98% went abroad. And I think you can link this back legally to Queen Isabella's charter to Columbus. I think you can link it to the Hudson Bay Trading and the Virginia Company historically. So,
well, it sounds to me like we're all the victim of a monumental fraud because
exactly.
Now hang on, because
we don't even own our country.
Well, yes, we do. Because the United States, Inc. may have sold shares in the country, but it wasn't theirs to sell because of that enclave clause in the Constitution. The United States, Inc., committed a criminal fraud not only against the American people, but against those people who bought the shares.
Well, U.S. Inc. isn't even an American corporation. So we've got a foreign corporation who's probably owned by the bankers, international bankers, and all the shares in this corporation is what represents the United States. 98% of them are owned by foreigners. That would be a share that's one step above the common share, which means that after you liquidate a corporation, all proceeds go to the certain class of stock, and the common shares get nothing. That's kind of like putting your money in the bank, and they own your money, and you get common shares of the bank as a so-called backup to your money. So,
well, this sounds to me like a bunch of weasel wording to try and legitimize what is essentially a theft of the country. A theft under color of law.
Rivero is the name.
Yeah, I got that.
And he had a guy on and has a copy of this thing. I've been trying to ask several people. The United States is definitely incorporated. That's the U.S. code. Okay, it's black and white.
Well, you can form a United States Incorporated. That doesn't mean it's necessarily the United States itself. I mean, I've seen corporations named for, like, the moon. That doesn't mean that corporation owns the moon. In fact, there was a scam going on a while back where somebody formed a corporation that claimed they had ownership to the moon and Mars, and they would sell you, a square mile, and you'd get a pretty certificate. And it was basically a scam here. But if this United States Incorporated claimed to be selling shares in the nation as a whole, they're selling something that doesn't belong to them. I mean, the image.
All this stuff is going on. You're exactly right.
Okay, well, Gary.
It's total fraud and treason when you get right down to it.
Yeah, I mean, Gary, you can't form a corporation and say, I all of a sudden own everything. And this United States Incorporated is clearly guilty of a monumental fraud both against the American people and against their investors. Whoever bought those shares, got taken for a royal ride, as it were. Anyway, listen, Gary, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here and switch over to Nancy in California, who's been waiting very patiently. Nancy, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, thank you. The information you were just talking about before this call about the uranium and the Clintons, it's all actually tied together. There's an article that was in the World Net Daily entitled Oregon Shootout Rooted in Clinton Uranium Trade, and apparently the Clintons benefited from arranging for Russia, as you said, to get uranium, some of which was under the land that these farmers were being hassled. The BLM was hassling them.
Yes.
Driving them off the land with all of their tactics. And it's an interesting article. Apparently, Russia has grabbed 1/5 of the U.S. uranium.
Yes.
So it sounds like you're already aware of it, so I will let you go.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the article here right now, and I'm going to go ahead and put that up here. I need to do something. My server's under attack. Okay.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. We must have said
Thank you
something
much.
somebody didn't like. Okay, well, we're going to let that sort itself out. All righty, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to take Steve in Colorado. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, buddy, long time no talk.
Yes.
The gentleman that was on the phone about USINC, a good book to read is You Know Something's Wrong When, an American Affidavit of Probable Cause, which the book is an actual affidavit of probable cause for fraud. And he could look that up on Amazon or go look up David E. Robinson, and it'll explain to you many of their books, of his books, how it all started and how it all began and what to do about it.
Well, it sounds to me like what we've got is a long history of these legal weasels who wrote a bunch of paper under which they could claim, hey, all of a sudden we own everything, and because you're not lawyers and you don't understand what we said, you have to go along with it. But I think we just need to reduce it down to its basic element. The United States government never had the authority to buy or sell the American nation itself. That's in that Constitution. And,
Mike, you're spot on.
Yeah, and basically this United States Incorporated committed a fraud against the American people by selling something they didn't actually own, and they defrauded their investors, the people who purchased the stock.
It was not disclosed to the American people. It's word trickery. It's word sorcery. And I think when you go to a legitimate lawful court, we should actually speak in common language, where we can actually represent ourselves without being threatened. And that's what's going on right now. And we should actually, we have to re-educate. People need to go back to what's been missing in our textbooks.
Well, the entire legal and governmental system has retreated into jargonism. And what that means is any establishment, whether it's the software companies or lawyers or anything, they start crafting a language just for their own use in order to obscure what they're doing to the general public. And that's a big part of the fraud. They get up and speak a bunch of Latin, and you're supposed to bow and say, yes, master, I guess you do own the land underneath my house, and I can't stop you from fracking underneath there. But it's a monumental fraud. I don't care how they reconstitute the federal government. It never had the legal right to sell something that it did not actually own in the first place.
You're right, Mike. They are a corporation masquerading as a government entity, and they're really not.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the issue is, I'm a staunch constitutionalist, if you hadn't figured that out already. And any government that is not in compliance with that Constitution and that Bill of Rights is not a legal, legitimate government, and I don't care how many pieces of paper they've written with Latin all over them, nothing can change that.
Amen to that.
Okay?
Mike, God bless you, buddy.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open, so feel free to call on in here. Now then, the agency we all love to hate. Probably the second most hated agency in the entire U.S. government, the TSA, the Tourism Suppression Agency. And I got a lot of weird emails following this incident where Claire and I went out to Kauai, and apparently somebody in the TSA stole her panties out of her luggage, which I just thought was the most bizarre thing imaginable until I did a web search and found out it's actually an epidemic problem. I mean, when I was a kid, the weirdos would steal the panties off the clotheslines outside the house for whatever it is they're doing with these panties. Now, there are no more clotheslines. Everybody's got dryers, so I guess all the weirdos went to work for the TSA. But a story that came out of Blacklisted News, half of TSA's 30,000 employees have been accused of misconduct. Nearly a third are repeat offenders. And nothing gets done about it. And it's really very infuriating because in all their years of stealing panties and dropping and ruining my laptops and pillaging iPods and everything from the luggage, they've never actually caught a single real terrorist. And every time the Department of Homeland Security runs a drill to test TSA, 90% of the practice bombs and guns get right past them onto the airplanes because they're too busy looking for panties in the luggage to steal. I mean, talk about an epic government fail. And that's become the the government as a whole. It's all an illusion. Trust us, we're doing this for your safety and your protection and your service, and they're not. It's all an illusion. All of these government agencies we're told are supposed to be protecting the people. They don't do it. TSA isn't finding terrorists. FDA isn't banning dangerous drugs. The Minerals Management Service didn't save us from the Deepwater Horizon disaster. The Securities Exchange Commission didn't stop Bernie Madoff. It's all an illusion to keep you complacent underneath a criminal government. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently they're starting that first roll call vote. This is the first ballot for the GOP presidential nomination. And so far, Ted Cruz has 59 votes. Ted Cruz cannot serve as President of the United States of America. He's not a natural-born citizen. And I got to tell you, everybody who's on that floor who's voting for Ted Cruz ought to be kicked out of this country because they either don't know the rules or they don't care. And we can't tolerate either one. Now, if they succeed in defeating Trump on this first ballot and they try and ramrod Ted Cruz down our throats, do you think for 1 second Hillary Clinton's lawyers are not going to go right to the court and say, hey, he's not a natural-born citizen. He can't be the candidate. Boy, talk about a crooked election. I mean, this is just embarrassing. They're casting their votes for somebody who's constitutionally ineligible to be the president. These people are all sellouts to Hillary Clinton. That's the only explanation. I mean, we know the Clintons have got the drug dealer vote all across the country. They're all there in favor, all the way back to Iran-Contra. All right, let's grab a couple of phone calls. Susie in Arkansas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. You know, when you were describing all the people or enumerating all the people that built this country, you forgot the most important people.
Yes, I did.
The
The farmers. That's a terrible oversight on my part. I'm a farm kid. You know, but there is, I mean, I left out the doctors, I left out the nurses, I left out the teachers, and it isn't because I don't feel they're not important. It's just if I'd gone down the entire list of I'd have a 12-hour show on my hands.
No. But the other thing is, from what I understand now, only like about 2% of our farmland now is in the hands of families.
Yeah, it's all been acquired by corporations. One of the sickest things is when Monsanto came out with their GMO seeds, and the official position is, they'll stay in the fields where they're used, and that's, of course, nonsense. Wind, birds, bees, and every time somebody's natural farm field got contaminated, it should have been treated as an industrial accident, and instead Monsanto would sue and take that land and add it to their corporate farms.
And basically, historically, the more prosperous nations had the farmers kind of at the top of the pinnacle, and the war-making people at the bottom. Now it's reverse.
That would certainly be an ideal. I don't know that that's necessarily true. Most governments' ultimate authority resides in their war powers. So it's always this monster lurking in the closet, in the office, to come on out and say, well, we're at war and now the old rules don't apply. But we should be very much looking at a return to respecting people like farmers and carpenters and craftsmen. And there's no respect in our society for these people. Everybody's caught up with wanting to be a money junkie. And that's another reason why our nation is in decline. If you don't respect the people who keep things working, they're not going to go on working.
Well, they've been taught that the only thing that commands respect is money, and they don't care how they get it.
You're absolutely right about that. All right, well, listen, Susie, we're going to let you go, and we're going to start with Rob in Chicago. But, Rob, I'm probably going to have to take you through this next commercial break.
You'll catch me after break, or?
No, go ahead and start.
Oh, okay. Okay, so anyways, yes, I am one of those people that is getting pushed aside because I'm a mechanic by trade. And I'm a, 4-time master mechanic, and it doesn't matter. It's just whatever. You just keep doing your job and work for slave wages. But anyways, I called in to talk about the Bill Whittle very eloquently discussing it with another guy that actually is of Canadian origin. The shenanigans and things within the FBI discussing Hillary's problems. And quite frankly, they were saying, well, why didn't he do anything? Because one of the things was that he brought up the RICO Act. And these people, these politicians, quite frankly, we could have a purge of most of the politicians.
I think that would be a good thing. All right, we have to take a break here. Don't hang up, Rob. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're watching that vote here, and it's looking very weird. I mean, I know about the bound delegates and everything, but I think they're going to try and cheat Donald Trump out of the nomination. And after the first ballot, the delegates are unbound. They can vote for whoever they want to vote for. And if they go back to trying to push Ted Cruz, it is a complete sellout of the United States of America. And maybe they're looking forward to the North American Union, where it won't matter if the guy's from Canada. But Ted Cruz was born in Canada of Canadian parents, and because he was born out of wedlock, his mother's original birth in the United States is irrelevant. He does not qualify for birthright citizenship. And I want to make a point here. Ted Cruz's supporters are saying it's okay that he was born in another country, as long as his mother was a citizen. But let's imagine back in the 1950s, and there's an American woman who emigrates to the Soviet Union, and she has a child there. She marries the guy, has a child, and raises the child in the Soviet Union. Then they return to the United States of America, and according to Ted Cruz's supporters, it's okay for that kid, who's raised in a society that views the United States as an enemy, to serve as President of the United States of America. That's how ridiculous this actually is. All right, we're going to go back to Rob in Chicago. Thank you for waiting patiently. You were talking about RICO possibly being an aspect of why the government is refusing to prosecute Hillary Clinton.
Yes, because the problem with even the FBI director, he goes back to the banking stuff, and the biggest problem here is because if somebody's making money off of something illegally, and other people are tied to them or working with them in the same system, then there is the potential for the RICO Act to be working. And the big problem here is, like Bill Whittle said, is if anybody there was copied, if the FBI director was copied by an email from Hillary Clinton off of her private server, she's complicit. He's complicit. They're all complicit. Anybody that got an email and did not do anything to say something at the time to fix it, they're now complicit. And on top of it, Hillary and Bill are making buckets of money. They should be prosecuted by the RICO Act. Period.
Well, Larry Klayman did file a RICO lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation down in Florida, but unfortunately it got put before a Clinton-appointed judge who just threw it out without even listening to the matter, at which point the FBI swooped in and took over the RICO investigation of the Clinton Foundation. And remember when they were asking Comey about that investigation, I mean, you could hear his butt cheeks snap together from blocks and blocks away on that one. Because, we're basically looking at an FBI director who was a member of a board of a bank that was involved in drug money laundering. Not exactly a sterling recommendation on the old resume there. And that Clinton Foundation is the hub. It's a monumental money laundering slush fund, and everybody's dipping their hands into it. And that is a huge, huge scandal. And I think that's really what's tying them together. Now, there's something you need to remember from history. Back during Prohibition, where they banned alcohol, those who were trading in the illicit substance alcohol made so much money they were able to literally buy their way into the highest levels of the U.S. government. That's where the Kennedy dynasty came from. Old Joe Kennedy was a rum runner, and he took and managed to put his oldest son into the Oval Office. And today we have the war on drugs, And those who are trafficking in the illicit substances, the drug criminals, have enough money to buy their way into the highest levels of the U.S. government. We're seeing it all happen all over again.
Yeah, I agree. And the big challenge right now is waking enough people up to see what they're doing. Plus, like you're saying, that the corporation, that fund is so, everybody's got their hand in it, and it's like a big, money orgy. And the people, the people think there's a soft landing to stopping this. Well, yeah, there's going to be a constitutional problem. There's going to be a constitutional problem if they steal this election from Trump.
They could have a revolution.
Owner of that being a representative for us.
The only thing that holds the American people in place during all this abuse and pillaging and police violence and the rest of it is this illusion that somehow we are still in control of our own nation. If they kick out Donald Trump and they force Hillary on us, basically that illusion is gone. And the American people won't have a reason to go along with this government any longer if there is no more real democracy in this country. And they're playing with fire. But we're dealing with people who are money junkies, and they're involved in the drug trade and drug money laundering, and that's the way these think. Look at all these other nations that just got swamped by organized crime and all the terrible things that had to happen down there. At least my hat's off to the people of Colombia. Their president was involved in drug money laundering, and they at least had the courage to put that guy on trial. And where is that courage here in the United States of America?
Well, there is courage with a lot of us, but the big challenge still comes down to you have these poison-minded people. They've been given the fruits of the poison apple, so to speak, to think that this is the way that it should be. And far be it from us commoners to want to go back and make things right because we're taking away their good free stuff that's coming from, the free tree in the middle of Eden. There's this great tree of free. And that's what these people believe in. It's sick. I mean, I try and, you can't talk sense to people that have this stuff. And unfortunately, that dependency
is how the government holds people in control. The government takes away everything that you have, then they'll give it back to you, but only as long as you obey that government. That's your enslavement. Dependency is slavery. It's exactly the system King George III had on the American colonists. Anyway, Rob, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Mateus in Canada. Thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I got 7 things, but just hang up on me if I run out of time. I'll just go one at a time and get your feedback. By the way, there is a lot of courage in America, but the humans are a herd species, and we need a leader. Just a quick comment on that, what you were just talking about.
Okay.
Here's an interesting example of 2 opposing agendas at the same time. Okay, so the government has one agenda where they want to pacify us and kind of make us fat, lazy, and stupid with the fluoride and the GMO and all that. On the other hand, they want to incite us to riot and violence so that they can declare martial law and clamp down. And so this is like, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious that they're trying to go like, oh, they're going to riot. Everyone's rioting. Come on, let's all riot. But we're all too GMO'd and fat and lazy and tired. And
I think it's an oversimplification. Yes, they want the American people dependent and lazy and not thinking, but they realize that there is a segment of the population that will not be driven down to ignorant servitude. Those are the ones they're trying to get to do some kind of a violent action in order to cull them from the herd, in other words. To basically find a reason to go on out and remove free-thinking, independent-minded people so that the remaining survivors are obedient slaves. And I've said that many, many times before. Despots and tyrants will not hesitate to kill off 10, 15% of their own population as long as the survivors are their guaranteed obedient servants afterwards.
And it's just hard for the good people to believe that. But, yeah. Okay, so the next thing is... I was very surprised to find out that here in Canada, the police can pull me over just to check my papers. And I filed a complaint, and it turns out that we don't have any protection against just random, just stopping me for my papers. Like, And then I realized, well, the Canadians, we never fought for our independence from the Crown. And so I guess I shouldn't be surprised if we have less freedoms than you, because we just
I wouldn't be so hasty because even though we do have that Fourth Amendment, our government's ignoring it. And yes, now the police, all they have to do is say this person was acting suspiciously, and they can pull you over and demand your ID and demand to search your car. It's a police state, and I think that's a heralding that the North American Union is going to become a police state, just like the EU is becoming right now.
Yeah, they don't even have to pretend that I was acting suspiciously. They just allowed to just, out of curiosity, check to see if my insurance is good and if I have a driver's license. But anyway, I'm very disappointed and discouraged to discover that we don't have these basic protections against that. By the way, you said this. I'm just reinforcing what you said regarding Putin has this incredible opportunity right now to even lie. He could get so much progress right now with one lie. And say, the last couple of spies we caught got the information from Hillary's server. He would just destroy Hillary, avoid a war, probably that's going to be nuclear war, with one lie, and then Trump will probably get in, or at least have much better chances, and have a friendly relationship with the West. Like that one lie would do so much.
Yeah, what if Putin doesn't have to lie? I mean, remember, all of a sudden Russia is identifying all these U.S. agents at the embassies and everything. And it's looking at the poor security on Hillary's private server. I mean, my server's got better security than hers did. And look at all the trouble I have with people breaking in here all the time. So he doesn't have to lie. He probably does have it. And I think what he may be doing is waiting until it's an absolute lock that, on the other side of the Democratic convention where Hillary's the candidate, and I think Putin is waiting to see if Trump survives the attempts to oust him here at this convention. But if Trump survives this convention and is the nominee, I think at that point, between now and November, a lot of opportunities for Russia to come on out and say, yeah, we were in Hillary's server and we did all this damage and we killed all these spies because Hillary was not taking care of the secrets. And I don't think he has to lie to do it.
That does make sense, that if he is going to come out with that. Oh, and by the way, I agree with you, it's likely he doesn't even have to lie, but if he needs to lie, it would even be worth it. But you're right that it would make sense for him to wait if he's going to do that, because why destroy Hillary now while they still have time to put up somebody else that he doesn't have this one push button destruction mechanism? So that may still be coming.
I think, hang on before you go any further, I think something Hillary's campaign needs to be deeply aware of is that there are probably a lot of people with very damaging information against Hillary who are waiting until after that Democratic convention, when the Democrats have committed to her and they're not going to be able to put in any kind of a substitute, and at that point you're going to start seeing a lot more stuff come out, I think.
That's a very interesting point. That makes a lot of sense, totally. Okay, you already say I forget the exact words, but the fastest way to bring down a tyrant is to make him act like one?
Yes, where everybody can see it.
Okay. So this is the success that we're having right now, is even if what's happening right now with the convention, if they do steal this from Trump, we definitely they're looking like tyrant. And everything that's going on right now, all the big stories in the last couple of months, the one good thread among them all is that they're definitely exposing that we're being run by oligarchies and tyrants.
Yes.
So we are having some victory in that sense.
We definitely are. Well, the biggest victory we have so far is that we have taken away from the corporate media and the government the ability to lie to the people with impunity. And they're in a panic because they've controlled us so long with lies. They don't know any other way to run a country. That's a major, major gap in their knowledge of statecraft, is how to actually manage a population without having to lie to them.
Yeah, and it's like a big tanker ship packed full of cargo. It's this big, huge, established, heavy momentum, slow, sluggish. It's hard for it to change course. And so the internet has developed faster than it can change course and deal with.
Yeah.
The internet alone is basically bringing this whole thing down.
Yeah, it is, and you need to remember the internet was never intended to be a public resource. And there was one effort by the government to sort of put the genie back in the bottle back in the 70s. But it did escape, and our economy is now dependent on it, and they don't know what to do about it. And it's rather interesting looking at the historical parallels between the reactions of our present oligarchs to the internet versus the oligarchs in Gutenberg's time when he rediscovered movable type printing and books became affordable to the middle class and literacy soared and people started seeing, boy, the church and the government have been lying to us about all this stuff all along. And those institutions that were able to adapt to a new reality of not being able to lie as much survived and perpetuated, and those institutions that couldn't evolve and adapt to the new environment went extinct. And I think the U.S. government, carrying the burden of 200 years of accumulated lies, is unable to evolve and adapt to the new reality. And that's why I think they're going to follow the Soviet Union into that trash bin of history.
Yeah, you said that what would be required was for some president to come along and say, okay, look, you're right, this happened, we're going to make some changes. The problem is that it's so difficult to do that because it would go, so many people would have to go to jail backwards in time because there'd be so much implications that it would be basically like all of the government would have to go to jail for the last 20 years of whoever was serving. And
well, if I,
everyone would be
hypothetically, if I were that president, I would simply offer a deal. You retire from public life and you get a presidential pardon. And we make room for some new people to come. You know, that's a good compromise position, I think. I'm not out for revenge or retribution. I'm out here to restore the republic. And, you know, whatever's going to work best toward that goal is the way that we need to go. Anyway, Mateus, I need to let you go. We've got one more caller. Okay. We're hitting the top of the show. Enough. Fred in Utah, I'm going to start with you, probably take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind? Fred, are you there? Oh, he hung up there. All right, no more calls today. And let's see, we're coming up on a commercial break here real soon. Apparently, they're trying to make a big stink over the fact that the Republican National Convention used We Are the Champions by Queen. And they got some of the Queen survivors screaming they're using it without permission. But it turns out the RNC did pay the licensing fees. And maybe the licensing people didn't forward the money along to Queens. And that's an epidemic problem in the online music world. Got to take a break. Back with the last segment after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And last segment of our program today. Interesting story came on out where somebody noticed over at Reddit that any time a story was posted with the title Clinton email, it was automatically voted down to level 0. And they reposted the same story several times under different names like Trump email or Bush email or just a completely made-up title, and nothing would happen. There's clearly a bot running on Reddit that's looking for Clinton email and voting down or shoving down all those posts. And at this point, it's becoming very obvious all of the social media platforms are playing similar games. I get complaints from readers all the time that attempts to post links to what really happened either mysteriously fail or will vanish shortly afterwards. And Claire and I have noticed the view counts on her music videos. When they start getting very high, they get knocked down without explanation. It's just one more indication of a corrupted society in decline. They're really working. The establishment is working to push Hillary onto us. And the more they push, the more we dig our heels in. Okay, they're now roll calling New Hampshire. And Trump is at 986. He needs 1237 to win. Cruz at 228. Kasich 25. Rubio 63. And already the anti-Trump delegates are saying that if Trump wins this, and it looks like he's going to just squeak by, that they've got something else they're going to try. To heck with the will of the people. Who cares what you voters think? Your job is to give us money and breed new workers and soldiers. That's your place in this society. Whatever gave you the idea that you should have anything to say about the running of this country? We've got too much democracy in this country. We've got a narcocracy in this country. It's like I was saying before, we're seeing a repeat of the corruption that accompanied Prohibition. When the rum runners had enough money from their illicit substances to literally buy their way into the highest levels of government, and we're seeing a replay now during the war on drugs, where the dealers in illicit substances have enough money to buy their way into the highest levels of government. We have an FBI director who was a member of the board of a bank caught laundering drug money. How does he get to be head of the FBI after that? And finally, let's see, over at ZDNet, Lying Scientists and the Lying Lies They Tell. And it's talking about how as science has become politicized and corporatized, more and more scientists are caught fudging what they're doing, and they're having to retract their papers. One guy doctored data on 11 of his papers. Harvard researcher got his PhD revoked. Or Yoshitaka Fuji, who has had to retract 183 of his own papers. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard Show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, Hump Day, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay angry. We're in a fight for the future, not of our nation, but of the world itself. And it's time to start getting angry about it. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.